Hey everyone, Sierra here. Today we're going to be talking about Meliodas and Elizabeth. Now this couple went through pure hell and we're going to get into that in just a sec here. They're the topic of discussion for our Let's Talk Ships number 6 and they're from the anime called 7 Deadly Sins. Now I have to be honest, this is definitely true love. In fact, they would have to be the definition of what I consider true love, at least in anime. Now Kushina and Minato, they are one of my favorite anime pairings. I love their story. But I don't think even their story tops Meliodas and Elizabeth's story. So what do you say we go ahead and get started and unravel their hellish journey together? Now I'm not even gonna bother lying to y'all. I did not finish 7 Deadly Sins. I must have capped at like season 4 or 5 or whatever the latest animated season was because it just wasn't doing it for me anymore. Not only was the animation kind of crappy at certain points, but I just found myself losing interest and I couldn't place why. But anyway, for those who do not know, 7 Deadly Sins is about a group of warriors who were wrongly accused of a crime they did not commit, and they're basically trying to redeem themselves and restore their reputation. Now this group of warriors that were wrongly accused of something that they didn't do, they're known as the 7 Deadly Sins, and we're going to be getting into someone known as Meliodas, who is the captain of the 7 Deadly Sins, and he is the Sin of Wrath. Now that title in sin alone is very scary. To be called the Sin of Wrath is very intimidating and speaks volumes about the type of person that Meliodas is, especially if you get him angry. While too much isn't known about his childhood, we do know that he was the leader of the 10 Commandments and he was the commandment of love. So he went from being a commandment of love to the Sin of Wrath. That's pretty crazy. We also know that Meliodas was held in such high regard because he had so much potential. I mean, it was even thought that he was going to become the next Demon King. Not to mention that Meliodas had quite the reputation, seeing as he was said to be greatly feared by the enemies of the Demon Clan. Plus, even the 4 archangels of the Goddess Clan, they feared Meliodas as well. We also know that Meliodas has a younger brother named Zeldris, and their relationship seems slightly complicated for lack of a better word. Maybe it has something to do with Meliodas being a favorite child of the Demon King. I mean, to me, I feel like he's definitely playing favorites because Meliodas is basically like the Itachi of Naruto compared to Zeldris, and Zeldris is kind of like the Sasuke, seeking attention from the father but not really getting it. I definitely know I'm not the favorite child, so I can kind of relate to Zeldris just a tiny bit. So let's get into Elizabeth. Elizabeth was one of the high-ranked members of the Goddess Clan and is the Supreme Deity's daughter. Off rip, they're already kind of different because Meliodas is from the Demon Clan, while Elizabeth is from the Goddess Clan. So they're not exactly a match made in heaven. Compared to Meliodas, we do know a little bit more about Elizabeth's past. Now, it was said that Goddess Elizabeth knew the 4 archangels from a very young age, and she was also a feared warrior during the Holy War. Now, when I look at Elizabeth, a warrior isn't exactly something that I see when I look at her. She looks all cutesy and innocent. She doesn't really scream warrior to me, like Meliodas or anyone else would. But apparently she earned the moniker Bloodstained Ellie. On the other hand, Elizabeth Leonis happens to be the 3rd adoptive princess of the Kingdom of Leonis and the 107th and current incarnation of Goddess Elizabeth. To be reincarnated 107 times alone is pretty crazy. So how exactly did they meet? Believe it or not, they met roughly 3,000 years ago, which is a long time, so Meliodas and Elizabeth have a lot of history between them. I could be wrong, and correct me if I am, but it's said that they met at some point after a battle and she had been flying around in the sky, while Meliodas was simply in the nearest mountain. And even though they were from opposing clans, when there were brief periods of peace, they got to know each other pretty well. They would kind of meet up in secret at the abandoned ruins of Heaven's Theater, and no one really knew about their meetings too much. Now here's where we start to get into the Holy War, and for those that don't remember, the Holy War was a huge conflict between the Demon Clan, the Stigma Alliance of the Goddess Clan, Fairy Clan, Giant Clan, and eventually the humans. At some point, I think Goddess Elizabeth and Meliodas wanted peace and they wanted to avoid going to war. So I wonder if them falling in love had anything to do with them wanting peace with each other. That could play a massive role, but just because they felt this way doesn't mean that everyone else felt the same way, and they ended up going to war anyway. Now here's where we get an idea of just how serious things are between Meliodas and Elizabeth, because Meliodas ends up betraying his clan for her. So far it sounds pretty cutesy and even romantic, but here's the catch. Things get a little bit dark and even messed up. So during the last days of the Holy War, the Demon King and the Supreme Deity seemed to have enough of their kids' defiance and decided to make them pay in the cruelest of ways. Like, I understand being a parent, you have to teach your kid a hard lesson sometimes, but this was definitely too hard of a lesson. The Supreme Deity cursed Meliodas with immortality, and each time Meliodas passed on, he would be revived and his emotions would be consumed more and more until he returned to the bloodthirsty demon he once was. While Elizabeth, on the other hand, was cursed by the Demon King with perpetual reincarnation. Now this basically forces her to live human lives in which she would always reunite with Meliodas and pass on before his very eyes time and time again. How cruel is that? I don't know about y'all, but I can't imagine what Meliodas must have felt to lose your loved one over and over and over again. And worst of all, continuously not being able to do anything about it. I mean, let's be honest here, it's already hard enough to lose a person you care about once, let alone having to experience it indefinitely. Naturally, we can't avoid all bad things that are going to happen to us. We can't even predict them when they're going to happen most of the time, they just happen. But in a case like this, how do you even begin to mentally prepare yourself for something like this, even knowing that it's going to come? And I will say I respect Meliodas a lot, because to go through something like this continuously takes a lot of mental fortitude and shows resilience. Alright, so let's get into my verdict. Now, if I have to be honest, I always thought this couple looked slightly odd side by side. Like, I didn't like how childlike Meliodas looked beside her. Maybe it's the height and how he carries himself, I'm not sure. But then again, look at Krillin and the 18 from Dragon Ball Z. Krillin's height is nothing compared to 18's, but Krillin still carries himself like an adult and he doesn't look childlike at all. So I'm kind of convinced it may have something to do with his personality, because I definitely will say that Elizabeth is more mature and that probably plays a role in the dynamic of their relationship. And while we're on the topic of how couples look in Seven Deadly Sins, sure, Meliodas and Elizabeth's relationship bothers me slightly because Meliodas looks a bit childlike, but for some reason Ban and Elaine's relationship takes it a step further for me, and I just don't like that shit because they look so wrong together. I feel like a hypocrite when I say this out loud, and I probably am, but even Diane and King's relationship doesn't bother me for some reason. It's just Ban and Elaine's, which is so weird. I just don't understand it. Anyway, I will say that one thing that sold me on this ship was how deep in Meliodas and Elizabeth's love ran. Not only did it uphold through the cruelest of punishments, but Meliodas is incredibly loyal to her and her only. Sure, he's a massive perv, but he's not a perv and a whore. He's just one or the other. Dark Snyder could definitely learn a thing or two because he's a pervert and he's a whore. Another thing that sold me on their ship was their love story. It's pretty unique and I don't think you'll find their love story anywhere else. I genuinely feel like it's impossible to not be touched by their story in some sort of way or fashion. So what do you think about Meliodas and Elizabeth? Do you like their ship? Do you like their dynamic? Do you think their relationship is fine as is, or do you think there's some kinks that could be worked out about them? How do you feel about Ban and Elaine, King and Diane? Let me know what you think. Thank you for tuning in. Sierra Nova is out.